Imagine you're a German fighter pilot in 1943, flying high above the European countryside in your sleek Messerschmitt Bf 109. Your plane is fast, agile, and lethal. For years, the Luftwaffe has dominated the skies, feared and respected by enemies everywhere. And then, across the horizon, you spot something strange lumbering into the fight. A massive, bulky American aircraft, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. You and your comrades laugh. The thing looks ridiculous, huge, overweight, like a flying barn. Compared to your nimble 109 or the deadly Focke-Wulf 190, this machine looks slow, clumsy, and out of place. German pilots sneered at it, calling it a flying tank or even worse. To them, it was an easy kill waiting to happen. But that laughter wouldn't last long, because inside that oversized beast lurked something terrifying. 8 heavy 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, capable of spitting out over 13 rounds every single second. Together, they could unleash a storm of lead so devastating that a single burst could shred a fighter, rip through bombers, or turn columns of tanks and trucks into burning wrecks. At first, German pilots underestimated it. They dived in for an easy kill, expecting the Thunderbolt to crumple under their guns. But instead, they found themselves staring into a wall of bullets. Entire Luftwaffe squadrons were shocked by its raw firepower, its durability, and its ability to keep coming back even when riddled with holes. The same bulky machine they mocked soon became one of the most feared aircraft in the skies of Europe. The P-47 wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't graceful. But it was deadly. And as the war went on, it proved that size, strength, and overwhelming firepower could change the course of the air war. This is the story of how the Thunderbolt, the Jug, went from a laughingstock to a legend, how German pilots went from mocking it to dreading the sound of its guns raining lead across the skies of Europe. When World War II erupted in 1939, the skies of Europe quickly became a proving ground for technology, strategy, and raw courage. At the center of it all was the German Luftwaffe. In the early years of the war, the Luftwaffe was unmatched. With pilots who had already cut their teeth during the Spanish Civil War and aircraft, like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190, Germany dominated the air war. These fighters were elegant predators, sleek, agile, and deadly. The Bf 109, in particular, became synonymous with German air superiority. Its combination of speed, climb rate, and firepower made it a nightmare for British Spitfires and Hurricanes during the Battle of Britain. The FW 190, introduced later, only cemented Germany's aerial reputation further. For Allied pilots, facing these machines was terrifying. The Luftwaffe wasn't just skilled. They were confident, almost arrogant. They believed they had the best pilots, the best aircraft, and the best tactics. And for a time, they were right. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, its Air Force was still relatively untested in the European theater. The U.S. Army Air Forces had solid aircraft, but they lacked the reputation and fear factor that German machines carried. For the Germans, American planes were just another set of targets. And when the P-47 Thunderbolt began to appear over Europe in 1943, it didn't exactly inspire dread. To German eyes, the Thunderbolt was the opposite of everything they considered a proper fighter to be. It was enormous, one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war. With its wide fuselage, large radial engine, and broad wings, it looked like a clumsy brute. Compared to the slim, aerodynamic 109 or the well-balanced 190, the Thunderbolt seemed almost laughable. German pilots mocked it as a flying brick, and it wasn't just its looks. On paper, the Thunderbolt had drawbacks that seemed to confirm German opinions. It was slower in a climb, less agile in a tight dogfight, and at first glance, it seemed unsuited for the high-stakes, swirling battles raging over Europe. Luftwaffe pilots, already confident in their superiority, assumed the Thunderbolt would be easy prey. What they didn't realize was that the P-47 was designed with a very different philosophy in mind. American engineers at Republic Aviation weren't trying to build the sleekest or the most maneuverable aircraft. They were trying to build something rugged, durable, and devastatingly powerful. They wanted a plane that could escort bombers deep into German territory, soak up punishment, and still deliver a deadly punch. The Thunderbolt's massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine made it one of the most powerful fighters in the skies. Its size wasn't just for show, it allowed the plane to carry heavy fuel loads, giving it range that German fighters couldn't match. And then there were the guns, 850 caliber Browning machine guns, one of the most lethal weapons packages ever mounted on a fighter. But in the early days, none of that mattered to the Luftwaffe. They had the kill counts, the combat experience, and the momentum. German aces like Erich Hartmann, who would go on to score over 300 aerial victories, epitomized the deadly skill of their fighter arm. Against such seasoned opponents, the Thunderbolt looked like a misfit. So when the first P-47 squadrons arrived in England in early 1943 and began flying combat missions over occupied Europe, German pilots laughed. They believed these bulky American machines wouldn't last long in real combat. To them, the skies were still theirs. But war has a way of shattering assumptions. The very qualities that made the Thunderbolt seem awkward would soon reveal themselves as strengths. While the Luftwaffe laughed at its size, American pilots discovered that the P-47 could dive faster than almost anything in the air. While Germans mocked its bulk, they would soon learn it could absorb punishment that would tear their own fighters apart. And while they sneered at its weight, they would come to dread the day those 8 machine guns opened fire in their direction. The stage was set for a clash between arrogance and innovation. The Luftwaffe thought the Thunderbolt was a joke, but very soon that laughter would be silenced by the roar of its guns. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt was never meant to be pretty. It was never meant to glide gracefully through the sky like a Spitfire, nor twist and turn with the agility of a Bf-109. The Thunderbolt was built with one brutal purpose in mind: to bring overwhelming firepower and survive in the deadliest skies of World War II. At the heart of this beast was its engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, a massive 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine that generated more than 2,000 horsepower. This wasn't just any engine. It was one of the most powerful engines fitted to a fighter aircraft at the time. The R2800 didn't just make the Thunderbolt fly, it made it thunder. Its roar was so distinct that German soldiers on the ground could recognize the jug before they even saw it. But all that power came with size. The engine was so huge that it gave the Thunderbolt its famously round, bulky nose. Add in its thick fuselage, wide wings, and reinforced frame, and you had the heaviest single-engine fighter of the entire war. Fully loaded, the P-47 could weigh over 8 tons, almost double the weight of a Bf-109. No wonder German pilots sneered at it as a flying tank or flying brick. What the Luftwaffe didn't understand was that this very bulk was its secret weapon. The Thunderbolt was nearly indestructible compared to other fighters. While German aircraft used liquid-cooled inline engines, the P-47's air-cooled radial meant it could take hits without instantly failing. A 109 or 190 might be crippled by one well-placed bullet to the radiator. A Thunderbolt could keep flying even with cylinders blown out and oil leaking. American pilots told stories of returning to base with wings shredded, fuselage full of holes, and yet the jug still made it home. Then came its firepower. The P-47 wasn't just armed, it was overarmed. 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each gun could spit out 13 rounds per second, and when all 8 fired together, that was more than 100 rounds a second. Imagine the sky filled with streams of heavy bullets, tearing through metal, armor, and even the thick frames of German fighters. A single burst could rip a Bf-109 to pieces. A few seconds of fire could obliterate a bomber. This made the Thunderbolt not just dangerous, it made it terrifying. Luftwaffe pilots who once laughed quickly learned that a head-on pass against a P-47 was suicide. Even a glancing burst could cripple their plane. Those 8 guns turned the Jug into a flying buzzsaw. And that wasn't all. Thanks to its size and strength, the P-47 could carry an enormous load of bombs and rockets, something most fighters couldn't do effectively. By 1944, Thunderbolts were flying not just as escorts, but also as fighter bombers, strafing German convoys, blasting railroads, and leveling supply depots. With 2,500 pounds of bombs and 10 rockets, the Jug could hit like a small bomber itself. But even as a pure fighter, the P-47 had tricks that surprised its enemies. The Luftwaffe thought it was too heavy to dogfight, but in a dive, the Jug became unstoppable. Its sheer weight gave it a diving speed unmatched by almost anything in the air. German pilots often tried to shake American fighters by diving away. Against a P-51 Mustang or a Spitfire, that could sometimes work. Against a Thunderbolt, it was suicide. The Jug could dive at more than 500 miles per hour, chasing down anything that tried to run. And here's the part that really shocked German pilots. Once the Jug dove, it could pull out safely thanks to its rugged construction and massive control surfaces. Many Luftwaffe pilots who tried to escape by diving found themselves either caught or torn apart by their own planes as they exceeded structural limits. The P-47 thrived where others broke apart. American pilots quickly learned how to use this. They wouldn't waste time in slow-turning dogfights with agile German planes. Instead, they mastered the boom and zoom tactic, dive from altitude, unleash a devastating burst from those 8 guns, then climb back up with sheer engine power before the enemy could react. Against this hit-and-run style, the Luftwaffe's edge in maneuverability meant little. This design philosophy also had another advantage: range. Early in the war, the U.S. struggled to escort its bombers deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe shredded unescorted B-17s and B-24s, but with external fuel tanks, the P-47 could fly farther and longer. Soon, American bomber streams had a wall of Thunderbolts protecting them. German fighters that tried to intercept found themselves facing squadrons of angry Jugs, all armed to the teeth. By mid-1943, the Thunderbolt had proven its worth. American pilots grew to love it, giving it the affectionate nickname Jug, short for Juggernaut. And that's exactly what it was: a slow, heavy juggernaut that crushed anything in its way. German pilots, meanwhile, stopped laughing. They began to dread the sight of the Thunderbolt's stubby nose and broad wings. What they once mocked as a flying brick was now a flying fortress of death. But the true test of the Thunderbolt's design was still to come. In the massive air battles of 1944, when thousands of American planes clashed with the Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe. There, the Jug would prove that power, durability, and firepower could break even the most confident enemy. By 1943, the skies over Europe had become the most dangerous battlefield of the war. American bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses, and B-24 Liberators were streaming across the skies in daylight raids, pounding German industry. But without escort, they were easy prey for the Luftwaffe. Waves of Bf-109s and FW-190s would slice through the bomber formations, leaving smoking wrecks falling through the clouds. At first, the P-47 Thunderbolt was deployed as a bomber escort, but many doubted if the heavy, bulky Jug could really stand up to the sleek German fighters. German pilots openly mocked it. Too slow, too heavy, a flying target, they said. But those jeers faded quickly when the Jug entered the fight. The P-47 wasn't built to dance. It was built to hit like a hammer. American pilots soon discovered that its best tactic was altitude. Climbing high above the bomber streams, Thunderbolts would wait for the Luftwaffe to attack. Then, in coordinated groups, They dove like predators from the sun. 8 50-caliber machine guns spat fire, ripping apart German formations before the enemy even had time to react. German pilots were stunned. They had expected slow, lumbering machines that could be picked off with ease. Instead, they faced roaring thunderbolts diving at terrifying speed, firing hundreds of heavy rounds in seconds, then climbing away before they could counterattack. What had seemed like an easy hunt turned into a nightmare. One Luftwaffe veteran later admitted, "We laughed at the Jug until we fought it. Then nobody laughed again." The true test of the Thunderbolt came during the daylight bombing campaigns deep into Germany. In October 1943, American bombers attempted raids on factories in places like Regensburg and Schweinfurt. Without long-range escorts, they suffered catastrophic losses. Entire bomber groups were annihilated. Enter the P-47. At first, its range limited it to shorter missions, but with drop tanks, the Jug pushed deeper and deeper into German airspace. By early 1944, bomber crews were breathing easier. The moment German fighters dove toward the bombers, swarms of Thunderbolts would intercept them. The Luftwaffe suddenly faced a brutal new reality. No longer could they simply climb into bomber streams, unleash chaos, and dive away. Every approach risked a deadly wall of 50-caliber fire. German losses mounted. A pilot of the 56th Fighter Group, one of the most famous P-47 units, described it simply. "We weren't pretty, but we got the job done. The Jug brought the bombers home." When the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy in June 1944, the Thunderbolt became the hammer that broke German resistance. Beyond escorting bombers, the Jug unleashed its full power as a fighter bomber. P-47s roared low over the hedgerows of France, unleashing bombs, rockets, and strafing runs with their 8 guns. German tanks that once terrorized the battlefield, Tigers and Panthers, suddenly found themselves shredded from above. The heavy armor of these beasts could withstand most ground weapons, but not the concentrated firepower of Thunderbolts. Rockets slammed into their turrets, 50-cal bullets ripped through thin top armor, and bombs obliterated convoys. German troops called the P-47 the juggernaut of the skies. Wherever it appeared, destruction followed. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't subtle. It was devastating. One U.S. officer remarked during the Normandy campaign, "The P-47 was our flying artillery. When we needed something gone, we called the Jugs." The Thunderbolt's reputation as a bomber escort was already growing, but its performance in dogfights silenced critics once and for all. In one encounter over France, a small group of Thunderbolts faced off against a larger formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109s. At first, the German pilots dove in with confidence. They expected to outmaneuver the bulky American fighters. Instead, the Jug pilots used boom and zoom tactics, diving hard, firing devastating bursts, then climbing back to altitude. Within minutes, several 109s were smoking wrecks. The survivors fled, stunned by the Jug's unexpected ferocity. Time and again, the P-47 proved that it didn't need to be graceful to win. It just needed to bring overwhelming firepower at the right moment. And it always did. Perhaps the Thunderbolt's most dramatic moment came in the winter of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge. As German forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, the weather grounded Allied air forces for days. American troops on the ground were pushed back, suffering under the weight of German armor. But when the skies cleared, the Jug returned with a vengeance. Thunderbolts swarmed over the battlefield, ripping apart German supply lines, blasting convoys, and hammering tank columns. Their presence was so overwhelming that American ground troops cheered whenever they heard the Jug's distinctive roar overhead. German soldiers, meanwhile, learned to fear that sound. One veteran later recalled, "When the P-47s came, you knew it was over. The sky itself turned against us." By the time the Battle of the Bulge ended, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Its pilots and planes had been bled dry, many of them by the relentless Thunderbolt. By war's end, P-47 pilots had destroyed more than 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. In the skies, they shot down thousands of German aircraft. The Thunderbolt had gone from being a laughingstock to one of the most feared machines of the entire war. Even Luftwaffe aces, men who had survived years of combat, admitted their grudging respect. Some called it the hammer of the air war. Others simply called it unstoppable. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the skies over Europe told a story as dramatic as the battlefields below. The Luftwaffe, the once unstoppable German Air Force, lay shattered. Its mighty Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, which had once ruled the skies of Europe, now lay twisted and smoking on airfields, or abandoned along highways. And standing tall among the victors of that air war was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the aircraft that had once been mocked, ridiculed, and underestimated. The Jug had not just survived the war, it had defined it. In the early years, German pilots had genuinely laughed at the Thunderbolt. To their eyes, it was overweight, overbuilt, and unsuited for the sleek, high-energy dogfighting that had made Luftwaffe pilots legends in the skies over France and Russia. The nickname Flying Brick wasn't just an insult, it was their honest opinion. But as the years passed, those same pilots stopped laughing. They learned the hard way that beneath the Jug's bulky frame lay terrifying firepower, monstrous speed in a dive, and nearly unmatched durability. Its 850 caliber guns could shred a fighter, annihilate a bomber, or even tear apart tanks and trains on the ground. Its radial engine and armored cockpit gave it a toughness that turned near-death situations into survival stories. Many Luftwaffe veterans admitted after the war that once the Thunderbolt appeared in numbers, their odds of survival plummeted. It wasn't just a fighter, it was a fortress with wings. While the Jug earned its name in the skies, perhaps its greatest contribution came in its role as a fighter bomber. As Allied forces pushed into France, Belgium, and Germany, Thunderbolts flew thousands of sorties every day, smashing bridges, railroads, and convoys. The German army, already strained by shortages of fuel and supplies, found itself crippled by relentless Jug attacks. German tank crews who once feared little from the air soon found themselves hunted. A Tiger tank might shrug off an anti-tank shell, but it couldn't withstand a rocket slamming into its engine deck from above. Even when tanks weren't destroyed outright, the damage to tracks and engines often left them helpless on the battlefield. The destruction statistics are staggering. By the end of the war, Thunderbolts had destroyed tens of thousands of vehicles, thousands of locomotives, and crippled supply lines across Europe. In many ways, the Jug was the spearhead of Allied ground attack power. But the Thunderbolt's most critical contribution was in the skies, shielding the lifeblood of the Allied war effort, the bombers. Before long-range escort fighters, bomber missions into Germany were nearly suicidal. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid in 1943 had proven it. Bombers without protection could not survive the deadly gauntlet of German fighters. Enter the P-47. With drop tanks, its range stretched farther and farther into German territory. By 1944, Thunderbolts were escorting bombers deep into the heart of the Reich. What had once been a slaughter turned into a fight, and soon after, into Allied dominance. American bomber crews spoke with gratitude about their Jug escorts. Seeing those broad wings form up beside them gave a morale boost that no amount of training could provide. The Luftwaffe, once feared, was now the hunted. What made the Jug so beloved by its pilots wasn't just its performance, it was its survivability. Time and again, Thunderbolt pilots returned home in planes that looked like they should have been scrap metal. Wings full of holes, engines coughing smoke, fuselages shredded, but still flying. One pilot famously landed his P-47 with an entire cylinder missing from the engine. Another limped home with part of his tail nearly blown off. Stories like these spread through the ranks, building a deep trust between man and machine. Pilots knew, if you were flying a Jug, you had a fighting chance. And in the brutal uncertainty of aerial combat, that meant everything. The impact of the Thunderbolt on the Luftwaffe cannot be overstated. By mid-1944, Germany was facing a crisis in the skies. Not only were its best pilots being lost at alarming rates, but its aircraft production was being systematically destroyed by Allied bombing escorted and protected by Thunderbolts. Veteran German pilots noticed the change immediately. What had once been a confident, aggressive air force became cautious, desperate, and often overwhelmed. Younger Luftwaffe pilots, rushed into combat with minimal training, were no match for the experienced American Jug pilots who now dominated the skies. By the time of the Battle of the Bulge, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The Thunderbolt, alongside the Mustang and other Allied fighters, had broken its back. When the war ended, the P-47 Thunderbolt held a record few could match. It had destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft and caused catastrophic damage to ground forces. It had proven itself as both an escort fighter and a ground attack monster. But perhaps its greatest legacy was the lesson it taught. Air power isn't just about speed or beauty. It's about survivability, firepower, and versatility. The Jug wasn't elegant, it wasn't graceful, but it won wars. For many American pilots, the Thunderbolt became a symbol of reliability and brute strength. They respected the Mustang for its range and speed, but they loved the Jug for its toughness. In their eyes, the Jug was the aircraft that brought them home. After the war, captured German officers and pilots were asked about the Thunderbolt. Many admitted they had underestimated it. Some called it the hammer of the skies. Others said simply, it was indestructible. One German pilot summarized it best. We thought it was too heavy to fight, but it fought harder than anything else in the sky. Though the P-47 was eventually retired in favor of newer jet aircraft, its influence remained. The concept of a heavily armed, rugged, and versatile fighter-bomber carried forward into the Cold War. Aircraft like the A-10 Warthog, another famously tough ground attack machine, carried echoes of the Jug's philosophy. Today, aviation historians look back on the P-47 with a mix of awe and respect. It may not have had the glamour of the Mustang or the elegance of the Spitfire, but its contribution to victory in Europe was immense. Without it, the Allied air campaign might have faltered. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is the story of a fighter that proved the doubters wrong. German pilots laughed until its 850 caliber machine guns filled the skies with lead. They mocked its size until it dived faster than anything they had. They dismissed it until it destroyed their supply lines, their tanks, and their very air force. The Jug was more than just a plane. It was a symbol of resilience, of overwhelming firepower, and of American industrial might. It showed that in war, the underdog doesn't always lose, and sometimes the biggest punch comes from the fighter you least expect. As one veteran pilot later said, "The Mustang may have won the glamour, but the Jug won the war." And so, the laughter of German pilots faded into silence, drowned out by the roar of the R-2800 engine and the unrelenting thunder of 850 calibers raining fire from the skies. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, mocked at first, feared in the end, earned its place in history not just as a fighter, but as a legend.